500 years before Columbus ever set foot on American soil, a fleet of ironclad Norse warriors had already bled on its shores. They called the land Vinland, a paradise of green forests and wild rivers. But what they found waiting for them in the shadows of those trees was something no Viking saga had ever prepared them for. A war so brutal, so relentless, that it didn't just end a colony. It erased an entire chapter of history. This is the story they never told you in school. Blood on the Vinland shore, the war that was erased from history. The world before the collision. The year is 985 AD. The known world is still a flat thing in the minds of most men. In the cold, storm-battered fjords of Scandinavia, a civilization unlike any other has been forged, not in the gentle warmth of Mediterranean sunlight, but in howling Arctic winds and the unforgiving sea. The Norse people, the Vikings, are not merely raiders. They are builders of worlds. Navigators of impossible oceans. Warriors who believe that death in battle is not a tragedy, but a gift from the gods. Their longships are engineering marvels, shallow-drafted enough to sail rivers, yet strong enough to cross open ocean. Their warriors wear iron ringmail, carry round shields of linden wood reinforced with iron rims, and wield axes that can split a man's skull through a helmet. From their mythological framework, Odin, Thor, the Valkyries, violence is not just permitted. It is sacred. But something else drives these men. Something quieter than glory. The Norse colonies in Iceland and Greenland are struggling. Resources are thin. Timber, essential for ships, for buildings, for survival, is nearly non-existent on those rocky islands. The colonies need expansion. They need a new land. A man named Bjarni Herjolfsson is the first to accidentally sight the North American coastline, around 985 AD, when storms blow his ship wildly off course. He sees the green forested shores but does not land. When he returns and tells his story in the mead halls of Greenland, a young son of Eric the Red is listening intently. His name is Leif Erikson. Now, across that same ocean, separated by thousands of miles of sea and thousands of years of history, another civilization breathes and lives. In the northeastern forests of what will one day be called North America, peoples that Norse sagas will call the Skrælings have carved out an existence as perfectly adapted to their world as the Vikings are to theirs. They are not primitive. They are not weak. They are the masters of guerrilla warfare, forest survival, and tactical ambush. Their arrows, tipped with sharp flint or bone, can fly with deadly precision from 200 feet. Their warriors move through dense forest like shadows, communicating without sound, attacking without warning. These are people who have inhabited this continent for over 10,000 years. The forests, the rivers, the coastlines, these are not unknown wilderness. They are home. Every inlet, every tree line, every tidal flat is mapped into the memory of generations. And they have fought before. Against neighboring tribes. Against invaders of their own world. They are ready, even when they do not know what is coming. Two worlds, separated by an ocean, are about to collide. And when they do, the consequences will be written not in books, but in blood. Leif Erikson and the discovery of Vinland. Around 1000 AD, Leif Erikson set sail westward from Greenland with a crew of 35 men. He is not searching for glory alone. He is searching for timber, for fertile land, for a place where the Norse can expand their world. After weeks at sea, he finds it. The coastline that greets him is staggering, lush green forests stretching as far as the eye can see, rivers teeming with salmon, wild grapes growing in abundance. He names it Vinland, the land of wine. He builds a small settlement of longhouses, spends the winter, and returns to Greenland the following spring with a cargo of timber and grapevines. His report triggers something electric in the Norse colonies. This new land, rich, warm, abundant, is exactly what they have been starving for. Plans for a permanent colony begin immediately. But Leif will not lead that colony. That task falls to his brother, Thorvald Eriksson, a harder man, a warrior's warrior, and to the ambitious Norse explorer Thorfinn Karlsefni. What they do not know, what no saga can prepare them for, is that this lush, beautiful land already belongs to someone else. First contact, the moment everything changes. Thorvald Eriksson arrives in Vinland around 1003 AD with a crew of 30 men. For the first year, they explore the coastline in relative peace, mapping rivers, cataloging resources, marveling at the richness of the land. Then comes the morning that changes everything. A small Norse scouting party, paddling along a sheltered beach in a skin boat, spots a cluster of figures resting beneath overturned canoes near the shoreline. The figures are sleeping. 9 of them. Skrælings, the Norse word for these people they cannot yet understand. Thorvald makes a decision that will seal his fate and the fate of every Norse colonist who follows him. He orders his men to attack. 8 of the 9 Skraelings are killed. 1 escapes into the forest. The Norse return to their camp satisfied with themselves. They have, in their minds, neutralized a threat. They have demonstrated dominance. This is how Vikings handle uncertainty, with violence, with decisiveness. What they have actually done is light a fuse. Days pass. Then weeks. The Norse begin to relax. Then, one pale grey morning, the horizon of the sea fills with canoes. Not 9 men. Not 30. Hundreds. A war fleet of Skraeling warriors, paddling with the fury of the storm itself, descends on the Norse camp. The air fills with arrows. Viking shields rise in a wall. The battle is fierce, bloody, and desperate. Thorvald Eriksson himself is struck by an arrow beneath his right arm, a wound that finds the gap between his shield and his ringmail. He knows immediately it is fatal. "I have been wounded," he tells his men, his voice steady even as blood soaks through his tunic. "An arrow flew between the edge of the ship and the shield into my armpit. Here is the arrow. And this wound will cause my death." He is right. Thorvald Eriksson, son of Eric the Red, brother of Leif, one of the boldest explorers in Viking history, dies on the shore of the New World. His men bury him on a headland and plant 2 wooden crosses at his head and feet, as he requested. 8 Skraelings died in the initial ambush. 1 Viking, a legendary one, died in return. The mathematics of vengeance are only beginning. The colony of Karlsefni, 3 years of war. In 1010 AD, the most ambitious Norse expedition to North America departs Greenland under the command of Thorfinn Karlsefni, a wealthy, respected merchant warrior, and his wife, the formidable Gudrid Thorbjarnadottir. They bring with them 158 settlers, men, women, children, livestock. They bring cattle. They bring the intention to stay forever. They establish their settlement, which they call Hop, meaning hope, near the previous Vinland camps. The land is everything the sagas promised. Rich soil. Clear rivers. Forests of straight timber. The settlers plant crops, build longhouses, and for a brief, golden season, they believe they have found their promised land. Then the Skraelings come. But not with weapons. Not yet. The first meeting is cautious, electrifying. A large group of native warriors emerges from the forest, carrying grey pelts for trade. They are wary but curious. The Norse are wary but hungry for resources. Trade begins, Norse red cloth in exchange for animal furs and food supplies. For weeks, an uneasy but functional peace holds. Karlsefni is smart enough to know how fragile it is. He gives his men a strict order: no one trades iron weapons or iron armor with the Skraelings. No swords. No axes. No shields. He has seen what weapons can do when they fall into the wrong hands on a hostile frontier. The trade continues. The Norse get furs. The Skraelings get cloth. But then, in the way that history's great catastrophes are so often triggered by the smallest, most stupid moments, everything breaks apart. A Norse warrior, irritated during a trade dispute, accuses a Skraeling man of stealing an iron axe head. Words are exchanged. Then a blade is drawn. The Skraeling man is killed. One man. One moment. One act of hot-tempered violence on a nervous frontier. Weeks of silence follow. The forest watches the Norse settlement with invisible eyes. Then the drums begin. A fleet of canoes appears on the river, so many that the water seems to darken with them. The Skraelings hoist something terrifying on a long pole, a large, dark sphere, the size of a sheep's belly, possibly an inflated bladder or a war totem, which they swing in a wide arc before releasing it toward the Norse camp. It lands with a sound like thunder. The Norse warriors, hardened men who have fought in shield walls, who have raided the coasts of England and France, break. They scatter in terror from this strange weapon they have never seen. All except one. Freydis Eriksdottir, daughter of Eric the Red, half-sister of Leif, is heavily pregnant. She cannot run. She watches the Norse warriors flee past her with contempt burning in her eyes. She bends down and picks up the sword of a fallen warrior. Then, in an act of sheer, magnificent defiance that even her enemies seem to recognize, she tears open her tunic and slaps the flat of the blade against her bare chest, screaming a war cry into the advancing horde. The Skraeling warriors stop. They have never seen anything like this. In their world, such an act carries enormous spiritual weight, the suggestion of a woman so fearless, so beyond ordinary humanity, that she courts death with a naked blade against her own flesh. Something in their cultural understanding of omens and power makes them pause, then retreat. The Norse survive the day. But the war is not over. It has only entered a darker phase. The escalation, when numbers become destiny. The raids continue. Each attack grows larger. Each retaliation breeds more warriors on both sides. The Norse are skilled fighters, perhaps the finest individual warriors in the world at that moment. In open combat, on a battlefield, a Viking warrior in full ringmail with an axe and shield is a terrifying opponent. In the shield wall formation, shoulder to shoulder, axes and spears projecting over interlocked shields, a small Norse force can hold against a much larger one. But this is not a European battlefield. The forests of Vinland are the Skræling's home. They attack at dawn from multiple directions simultaneously. They use the trees as cover, loosing arrows in coordinated volleys before melting back into the shadows. They know every hidden path, every river crossing, every ambush point. They do not fight to win a single battle, they fight to make the land untenable. The Norse are finding that iron armor and superior swords mean less than they expected against an enemy that refuses to stand still and fight. And then there is the matter of numbers. The entire Norse colony in Vinland numbers fewer than 200 souls. The Skræling population of the northeastern coast, including the ancestors of the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, and possibly the Dorset Paleo-Eskimo peoples, numbers in the thousands. Perhaps tens of thousands. Every Viking killed cannot be replaced. Every fallen Skræling warrior is replaced by 10 more. Karlsefni is a practical man. He runs the numbers in his head, and he does not like what he sees. He has families in this settlement, children, wives, elders. He did not come to Vinland to preside over a massacre. After 3 years of grinding, relentless conflict, 3 years of raids, counterattacks, trade negotiations that collapse into bloodshed, brief truces shattered by new provocations, Karlsefni makes the decision. They will leave. Not in defeat, the Norse never admit defeat. They will frame it as a strategic withdrawal, a practical decision. The land is rich but the enemy is too numerous, too relentless, too perfectly adapted to this terrain. In 1013 AD, the last Norse settlers load their longships and sail east, back toward Greenland. Behind them, the Vinland settlement stands empty, longhouses slowly absorbed back into the forest, Norse graves marked by crude crosses that will moss over within a decade. North America returns to its rightful inhabitants. Freydis Eriksdottir and the dark final chapter. But the story of Vinland does not end with Karlsefni's departure. Freydis, the fierce, sword-wielding daughter of Eric the Red, returns to Vinland one more time, leading her own expedition. This is the darkest chapter of the Norse saga, and it speaks to the violence that the Vinland conflicts had unleashed not just between Norse and Skrælings, but within the Norse themselves. Freydis organizes a joint expedition with 2 Icelandic brothers, Helgi and Finnbogi, each contributing 30 warriors. The plan is to profit from Vinland's resources. But Freydis, cold and calculating, turns on her partners in the night. She wakes her husband, Thorvard, and convinces him that the brothers have insulted her. She demands vengeance. Thorvard's men fall upon the sleeping Icelandic warriors and kill them all. But 5 women among the Icelanders remain. None of Thorvard's men will kill them. Freydis picks up an axe herself. She kills all 5. When she returns to Greenland, she swears her companions to silence with threats. But Leif Erikson, her half-brother, eventually learns the truth. He tortures 3 of her men until they confess. Then he turns to his sister. He cannot bring himself to punish her as she deserves. But he pronounces a curse upon her name and her bloodline. I lack the heart to do to her what she deserves, Leif says. But this I predict, her offspring will not prosper. The Vinland saga records that no one thought well of her or her family after that. Freydis Eriksdottir, the most extraordinary woman in Viking history, a warrior of impossible courage, ends her story not as a hero, but as something far more complicated. A monster who was also a survivor. A killer who was also a pioneer. Like the Vinland colony itself. The archaeology, when myth becomes proof. For centuries, the Vinland sagas were considered legend. Beautiful stories. Viking mythology. The idea that Norse explorers had colonized North America 500 years before Columbus was dismissed by mainstream historians as romantic fantasy. Then, in 1960, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his archaeologist wife and Stein Ingstad made a discovery that changed everything. At a place called Lance Auxiliary Meadows, at the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada, they found it. The remains of a genuine Viking settlement. 8 Norse-style longhouses. A forge for smelting iron. Carpentry workshops. Personal items, including a Norse spindle whirl for spinning thread, identical to those found in Greenland and Iceland. The carbon dating was unambiguous, 1000 AD. The sagas were true. But the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Who exactly were the Skraelings? Archaeological evidence suggests the Norse encountered multiple indigenous groups, possibly Dorset Paleo-Eskimos, possibly the ancestors of the Beothuk people, possibly Mi'kmaq or other Algonquian-speaking peoples from further south along the coast. What is clear is this: the encounter was not brief. It was not a single skirmish. It was a sustained, multi-year conflict involving complex trade negotiations, cultural misunderstandings, escalating violence, and ultimately, Norse abandonment of the continent. The Skraelings did not defeat the Vikings in the conventional sense. No single battle drove the Norse away. What they did was something more sophisticated. They made staying impossible. They used their superior numbers, their intimate knowledge of the terrain, and their unrelenting willingness to continue fighting to impose a cost on the Norse colony that eventually exceeded what any rational leader could justify paying. In this sense, the indigenous people of North America defeated the Vikings not by breaking them in battle, but by outlasting them. The legacy, what this war means. Consider what this story represents. At the turn of the first millennium, two of the most formidable warrior cultures on Earth encountered each other on a wild, forested shoreline. One came from a world of iron and longships and Norse mythology. The other came from a world of forest warfare, ancestral land knowledge, and deep spiritual connection to the natural world. Neither fully understood the other. Neither could communicate in the other's language. Every gesture, every action, every trade negotiation was filtered through a lens of fear, misunderstanding, and the fundamental human terror of the truly unknown. The Norse called the indigenous people Skraelings, a word that diminished them, framed them as primitive and inferior. The historical record does not preserve what the indigenous people called the Norse, those pale, iron-wearing giants who arrived from the sea in ships with dragon heads. But we can imagine the councils held in longhouses deeper in the forest. The debates. The arguments between those who wanted to trade and those who wanted to fight. The shamans reading omens in the smoke. The first Viking to die in North America was Thorvald Eriksson, killed by an arrow on a beach for a massacre he ordered. The sagas record his last words with almost unbearable dignity. There is no rage in them. Only acceptance. The last chapter of Vinland, Freda's brutal expedition and the murders she committed, suggests something about what prolonged frontier violence does to people. The Norse who went to Vinland were not simply raiders or conquerors. They were settlers, families, people with dreams of a new home. The relentless warfare of that frontier turned some of them into something else entirely. And then they left. And for 500 years after the Norse departure, North America remained untouched by European boots. The forests of Newfoundland closed back over the abandoned longhouses. The Norse crosses rotted into the soil. The rivers ran clear and cold and unmarked by European hands. It would be 1492 before the next European ship crossed that ocean with intentions of settlement. And that story, Columbus, conquest, colonization, would end very differently for the indigenous people of the Americas. Which makes what happened in Vinland between 1000 and 1013 AD all the more remarkable. For 13 years, on the northeastern edge of a continent, a handful of indigenous warriors defending their homeland stopped the greatest seafaring warriors in the world. They did not do it with superior weapons. They did not do it with armor or iron. They did it with numbers, with knowledge, with patience, and with the absolute refusal to yield the land that belonged to their ancestors. The Vikings came to Vinland looking for paradise. What they found was a people who would not surrender it. And in the end, against all the sagas, against all the iron and the fury of the Norse world, the land won. The arrow in the dark. On a windswept headland in Newfoundland, somewhere beneath centuries of moss and soil, there is a grave. 2 wooden crosses, long since returned to dust, once marked it. The man buried there came from the fjords of Norway, sailed the width of the Atlantic Ocean, and died with an arrow under his arm on the shore of a world his civilization would not claim for another 500 years. His name was Thorvald Eriksson. He was the first European to die in North America. He will not be the last. But for a long time, a very long time, the continent he bled upon remembered only the people who were already there. And that, perhaps, is the most important part of this story.